Ramaphosa following the fire that left many dead and injured in Johannesburg. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has received the ambassadors of ECOWAS member countries as part of the promotion of the initiative of the President of the Republic in favor of a political settlement and peaceful settlement of the crisis in Niger. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has floated the idea of a 9-month transition for the military in power in neighboring Niger, the latter having raised their voice against France by announcing their intention to expel the French ambassador to Niamey. Those were the headlines and other news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, has sent a message of condolences to his South African counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa, following the fire that left many dead and injured in Johannesburg. It is with great sorrow that we have learned of the tragedy that has shaken Johannesburg following the devastating fire that claimed many victims, reads the message of condolence. In the face of this painful tragedy that has struck the friendly people of South Africa, I send, on behalf of the Algerian people and government, and on my own behalf, my sincere condolences and express all my sympathy to Our Excellency and to Your Excellency and to the families of the victims, wishing a speedy recovery to the injured, and reiterating to you our sincere solidarity in these painful circumstances, wrote President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. While reiterating our sincere condolences, please accept, Excellency, Mr. President, and dear brother, the expression of my most distinguished greetings, concluded the head of state. Let's recall that the death toll from a fire in Johannesburg apartment block or story building has risen to 73, the South African city's emergency services announced on Thursday. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has received a telephone call from the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State for African Affairs, Molly V., during which he reviewed the main elements of the initiative of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, for the settlement of the crisis in Niger, according to a statement from the ministry. The telephone call focused on the latest developments in the crisis in the Republic of Niger and the prospects for strengthening cooperation and coordination between Algeria and the United States of America to help promote a political solution in the light of the initiative of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune. In this respect, at the same source, Ahmed Attaf reviewed the main elements of the initiative and the overall vision it reflects for resolving the crisis in Niger in its various dimensions as part of a participatory approach, encouraging the contribution of all interested parties, both internally in Niger and regionally and internationally. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has received the ambassadors of member countries of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, as part of the promotion of the initiative of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, in favor of a political and peaceful solution to the crisis in Niger, according to a press release from the ministry. This is the ambassador of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to Algiers, whose country currently holds the presidency of ECOWAS, and the ambassadors of Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Guinea-Bissau, according to the same source. Now, the Minister of War, Veterans and Right Holders, Laïd Rabiga, has received the chairman of the People's Committee of the Vietnamese province of Dien Bien, Ly Tian Do, and the delegation accompanying him on his visit to Algeria as part of the strengthening of cooperation relations with the province of Batna, according to a ministry press release. The meeting enabled the Vietnamese delegation to learn about the ministry's missions and the interest shown by the state in the social protection of war veterans and their beneficiaries and in the preservation of the national memory. The two parties highlighted the level of close historical relations between the two friendly countries, which date back to the common struggle of the two peoples to recover their freedom and sovereignty. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has floated the idea of a 9-month transition for the military in power in neighboring Niger, the latter having raised their voice against France by announcing their intention to expel the French ambassador to Niamey. Said Bougazi has more details in this report.
Nigeria's president, who is also head of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has cited as an example the 9-month transition that took place in his country in 1999. The president sees no reason why this cannot happen again in Niger if the military authorities are sincere, said a statement from the Nigerian presidency, but warned that the sanctions imposed by ECOWAS would not be eased without positive adjustments by the new regime in Niamey. This is the first time that an ECOWAS country has mentioned a time frame for a possible transition. However, in a statement issued on Thursday evening, the West African organization reiterated that its position remained clear and that the military authorities in Niger must restore constitutional order immediately by releasing and reinstating President Mohamed Bazoum in office, who was deposed in the coup on 26 July. ECOWAS has imposed heavy economic sanctions on Niger since the end of July and on several occasions has brandished the threat of military intervention. On Tuesday, Algeria, Niger's influential neighbor, proposed a 6-month transition plan before a return to constitutional order. On 19 August, the generals in power in Niamey had suggested a transition of no more than 3 years. Niger's military regime is also engaged in a diplomatic arm wrestle with France, a former colonial power and partner of the country in the fight against terrorism. According to a letter from Niger's Ministry of Foreign Affairs dated Tuesday, the police have been instructed to proceed with the expulsion of French Ambassador Sylvain Ité. The letter also states that the authorities have withdrawn his immunity and his diplomatic visa, as well as all those of the members of his family.
Still in Africa, Gabon's new strongman General Brice Oligui Nguema will be installed as president of a transitional government on Monday of as yet undetermined period. But the opposition is urging the coup leaders to recognize the victory of its candidate in the presidential election. General Oligui, at the head of the soldiers who overthrew President Ali Bongo Ondimba, who had just been re-elected, has promised to gradually set up the institutions of the transition and to respect all Gabon's external and internal commitments. To the Western Sahara file now, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the occupied territories and Sahrawi communities has condemned the international community's silence in the face of the genocide and crimes perpetrated by Morocco against defenseless Sahrawis in the occupied areas of Western Sahara, or occupied territories of Western Sahara. More details with our colleague Jamal Slimani in this report.
In a press release issued on the occasion of the International Day of the Victims of Forced Disappearance, celebrated each year on the 30th of August, the Sahrawi Ministry reiterated its condemnation of the suspicious silence of the international community regarding the genocide and crimes perpetrated against the Sahrawis in the occupied cities, demanding that the fate of some 500 Sahrawis reported missing be revealed, including 15 young people abducted on the 25th of December 2005. The communique relayed by the Sahrawi press agency SPS also called for the release of all Sahrawi political prisoners and an end to the military siege and media blackout imposed on the occupied part of Western Sahara, reiterating the need to protect Sahrawi civilians and guarantee their fundamental, just and legitimate rights, the most important of which remains the right to self-determination and independence. The military also recalled the war crimes, genocides and crimes against humanity committed by the Moroccan occupier against the Sahrawi people since the 31st of October 1975 and the military invasion of the country, such as throwing civilians from planes, executing them outside any legal framework, burying them alive in mass graves, and bombing them with napalm. It underlined that these serious crimes affected individuals and society in blatant violation of international humanitarian law and all the relevant international conventions, pointed out that they were crimes for which there was no statute of limitations committed against the people fighting for their freedom and independence.
And a U.S. delegation led by Joshua Ares, Assistant Secretary of State for North Africa, is starting today a visit to the Sahrawi territories as part of the efforts made to revive the peace process sponsored by the United Nations in Western Sahara. Sahrawi news agency SPS said that political discussions with Sahrawi leaders and meetings with groups of women and young people, in addition to visits to certain structures, are high on the visits program. At the end of its visit, the U.S. delegation will be received by the President of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic and Secretary General of the Polisario Front, Brahim Ghali. On this occasion, the Polisario Front reaffirmed its full and constructive cooperation with the efforts of the UN and the African Union to accelerate the decolonization process in Western Sahara by allowing the Sahrawi people to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and independence in accordance with relevant UN and AU resolutions. Still with the Western Sahara file, units of the Sahrawi People's Liberation Army have carried out new attacks against positions of the Moroccan occupying forces in the Awsart sector, according to military communique 864 issued by the Sahrawi Ministry of Defense. The units bombarded positions of the Moroccan occupying forces in the Awsart sector, inflicting heavy human and material losses on them, according to the communique. About 4.8 million people have been displaced inside and outside Sudan due to the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces. More details with our colleague Jamal Salmani.
The United Nations humanitarian agency OCHA said an estimated 1 million people have crossed into neighboring countries, while at least 2 million children have been forced from their homes since the conflict in Sudan erupted in mid-April. There are also concerns as the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary continues. Civilian displacement and humanitarian needs will steadily increase. OCHA in its latest bulletin also noted that the 2023 Sudan Humanitarian Response Plan is only 26.4%, with $676.9 million received as of the 31st of August. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has reported 3,046 suspected measles cases and 84 associated deaths in the White Nile, Blue Nile, North Darfur, and Red Sea states of Sudan, among others. Nearly 72.3% of internally displaced people are originally from Khartoum. In addition, about 963,000 people have crossed the border into neighboring countries as of the 2nd of August, including Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, according to the UN Refugee Agency. Apart from conflict hotspots like Darfur and Khartoum, the fighting has reportedly now spread to other populated areas, including South and West Kordofan, limiting the delivery of and access to life-saving services for those in urgent need. According to the latest update from Integrated Food Security Phase Classification on Sudan, up to 20.3 million people across Sudan are acutely food insecure and need food and livelihood assistance during July and September.
To the thorny Middle East file now, a young Palestinian man was fatally shot by Zionist occupation forces this morning during a Zionist military raid into the town of Aqaba in the northern part of the West Bank Governorate of Tubas, according to medical sources. The Ministry of Health confirmed that the young man, identified as Abdurrahim Faiz Ghannam, 36, had been critically injured in the head by live ammunition fired by occupation forces during the air raid before he was pronounced dead of his wound about an hour later. The Zionist occupation forces had stormed the town of Aqaba in the morning hours, and during the incursion they opened fire at residents, injuring 4 young men. 2 of them were wounded by live ammunition, including Abdurrahim Ghannam, who tragically died of his wounds later. The other 2 were injured by rubber-coated metal bullets. Additionally, a house in the town reportedly suffered significant damages by Zionist missiles during the raid. And still in the Middle East, UN Security Council has extended the mandate of the UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon after difficult discussions, notably on the issue of freedom of movement for peacekeepers. The vote, initially scheduled for Wednesday, was postponed to allow negotiations to continue a few hours before the expiry on Thursday of the mandate of this force, which has been present since 1978. Said Bougazi has more.
The resolution, adopted by 13 votes in favor with 2 abstentions, Russia and China, extends the mandate of UNIFIL until 31st August 2024, largely repeating the wording adopted a year ago on the freedom of movement of the some 10,000 peacekeepers, which has since been contested by the Lebanese government and Hezbollah. The text thus calls on all parties to ensure that UNIFIL's freedom of movement in all these operations and access to the entire Blue Line are respected and not impeded. UNIFIL does not need prior authorization or permission to carry out the tasks of its mandate and is authorized to conduct its operations independently, the text continues, stressing, however, the need to coordinate with the government of Lebanon. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has recently deplored the fact that UNIFIL still does not have full access to certain locations. The Lebanese government, in a letter to the UN Secretary-General, also called for a renewal of the force, but on the basis of the 2021 resolution, which did not insist as much on the independence of movement of peacekeepers. Unfortunately, the text does not reflect all our concerns, reacted Lebanese Representative Jean Mrad. Freedom of movement must be respected, yes, but it must also include controls for various reasons, she added, referring notably to the safety of UN personnel.
And finally, in Pakistan, 9 soldiers have been killed and 5 others injured in a suicide bomb attack on a military convoy in the west of the country, the army announced. The attack was carried out by a person on a motorbike 61 kilometers from the border with Afghanistan in the Banu district of North Waziristan, said the Army's information service. The suicide bomber crashed his motorbike into a lorry belonging to a military convoy, a provincial minister added. On 20 August, a bomb attack on a bus carrying workers building a military post, also in North Waziristan, killed at least 11 people. With this, we come to the end of this news bulletin for today. Time now for a weekly program with my colleague Jamal Salmani, a program devoted to Islam in Africa. And with this, we come to the end of it. We'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin in English. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Aljazeera International, and bye-bye for now.
Hello and welcome on Radio Aljazeera International. I'm Jamal Salmani. The historical roots of Islam in America are complex and contested. Some historians argue that Muslim explorers may have come to this continent long before Christopher Columbus, with the earliest estimates dating to the 12th century. Many contend that Muslims played a vital part in numerous European expeditions to the Americas, both as map makers and as guides. Estevanico of Azamor, a guide who landed in Florida in 1527, is often cited as the first documented Muslim in America. By the late 1700s, historical records indicate the presence of Moors living in South Carolina, many of whom were expelled from their homeland under edict of the Spanish crown. The first significant migration of Muslims to America, however, is an indisputable fact. In 3 centuries of the slave trade, an estimated 10 to 50% of the 10 million Africans brought to these shores against their will were Muslims. American slavery brutally denied the basic humanity of Africans, dissolving their families and suppressing their religious practices. Forced conversion to Christianity was commonplace. However, historical records indicate that many enslaved African Muslims strove to preserve their religious and cultural heritage even after conversion. Much of this history remains to be recovered. Historical documents including oral histories of the great-great-grandchildren of enslaved people, as well as narratives and diaries of enslaved people, indicate that some of the earliest Muslims in America performed Salat daily, observed the fast of Ramadan, and recited and read the Quran. Oral traditions and historical records celebrate the life of Bilali, also known as Bilali Muhammad and Bu Ali, enslaved on the Sea Islands of Georgia. According to a scholar of these traditions, Dr. Alan Austin, Bilali was multilingual and a heroic fighter during the War of 1812. He was reported to have saved many lives during a hurricane in 1824. Bilali lived as a Muslim and was buried with his prayer log and Quran. He gave many of his children Muslim names, and ethnographic interviews with those who knew the family indicated that they performed daily prayers. Another enslaved American Muslim, Al-Hajj Omar ibn Said, wrote his autobiography in 1831. This document, which has been translated into English, describes the life of a trader, a soldier, and a faithful Muslim who performed the Hajj and studied the Quran for 25 years before being enslaved. He said, quote, "Before I came to the Christian country, my religion was the religion of Muhammad. May God have mercy upon him and give him peace. I walked to the mosque before daybreak, washed my face and head and hands and feet. I prayed at noon, prayed in the afternoon, prayed at sunset, prayed in the evening. I gave alms every year. I went on pilgrimage to Mecca, as all did who were able. When I left my country, I was 37 years old. I have been in the country of the Christians 24 years. Today in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the Masjid Omar ibn Said on Southern Avenue stands as testament to the legacy of the first American Muslims, a legacy which continues to inform contemporary Islam in America. These are just two examples of African American Muslims from the 19th century, pointing to a rich history. The 19th century was also the time in which one of the first Euro-Americans embraced Islam, a man named Muhammad Alexander Webb. Webb was born in New York in 1846 and raised as a Presbyterian. He was appointed to the position of U.S. Consul in the Philippines in 1887, where his studies of Islam life led him to embrace Islam. Webb devoted the remainder of his life to teaching others about Islam and founded the American Islamic Propaganda Movement. In 1893, as a proud American Muslim, Muhammad Alexander Webb represented Islam as the world's parliament of religions in Chicago. Hello and welcome to the second part. The majority of Muslims in America, like most other Americans, are immigrants or descendants of immigrants. In the late 19th century, Muslims began immigrating to the United States. The first immigrant Muslims came from Syria, Lebanon to the East Coast as early as the 1870s. Later to be followed by European Muslims, Muslims from the Indian subcontinent came to the West Coast in the early 1900s. The Syrian immigrants from what is today Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria were often single men attracted by economic opportunity. Many worked as peddlers, especially in the Midwest. Gradually, Muslims began settling in industrial areas such as Wall River, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Toledo, Ohio, and Michigan. As early as 1901, many South Asian Muslim immigrants started coming to the U.S. from what is today India and Pakistan. They traveled by ship from India, entered through the port of Vancouver, Canada, and migrated south to California for better farming opportunities. Bosnian Muslims entering through eastern ports migrated to Chicago beginning in 1906. By the 1920s, American Muslims were widely diverse and dispersed throughout the United States, with South Asians, Albanians, Turks, Bosnians, as well as people from Syria, Lebanon, scattered in small communities throughout the U.S. Many early Muslim communities did not have enough funds or people to establish a mosque. Instead, they met in private homes, rented out halls for holidays, and founded social organizations which were intended to preserve both their ethnic and religious heritage. The first documented communal prayer of Muslims in America was in Ross, North Dakota, in 1900s. By the 1920s, small communities across the United States were gathering for prayers and forming the first Islamic associations. One of the first groups formed was a Muslim charitable organization, the Red Crescent Society in Detroit, Michigan. Other early associations of Muslims included South Asians in Sacramento, Bosnians in Chicago, Turco-Tatars in New York, and small immigrants communities from Syria, Lebanon, in Detroit, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. With the First World War, the Immigration Act of 1924, and the Great Depression, Muslim immigration began to slow. While there was a brief upsurge in immigration between the two world wars, racially biased immigration laws severely restricted the growth of many early Muslim communities. The first known American mosques were established in Biddeford, Maine in 1915, in Ross, North Dakota in 1920, in Highland Park, Michigan in 1923, and in Michigan City, Indiana in 1925. Declining immigration and rising assimilation eventually caused most of these mosques to close. In 1934, the building now known as the Mother Mosque of America was established by a Syrian Lebanese community in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Fundraising for the mosque included community dinners and appeals to other Muslim communities scattered throughout the U.S., such as Chicago, Toledo, and Detroit. This simple structure, nestled in America's heartland, is the oldest purpose-built mosque that is still in use today.
Radio Algérie Internationale vous invite à suivre ses programmes en streaming.